John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, 3rd of January 1892 to 2nd of September 1973, was an academic and an author. I have to admit that I'm no expert on Tolkien and his work, and I'm sure that many of you, my viewers, will discover inaccuracies in what I have to say. You see, for many, Tolkien's books are sacred books, but not I. That's not to say that I'm unfamiliar with them, but I certainly have not memorised them. I approach this more through my interest in philosophy and indeed a passing interest in folklore. I begin with a biography of Tolkien which Tolkien himself would disapprove of, as he was very firm that his books were not influenced by his life's experience. Such remarks are typical of conservatives like Tolkien, who refute their own biases, suggesting that some things are simply natural or human nature. The Tolkien family originated in the East Prussian town of Kreuzburg, now Slavskoe, near Königsberg, now Kaliningrad. Although Tolkien himself was born in Bloemfontein, now in South Africa, his father, Arthur Reuel Tolkien, 1857 to 1896, was an English bank manager, and his wife Mabel, née Suffield, 1870 to 1904. The couple had left England when Arthur was promoted to become head of the Bloemfontein office of the British Bank where he worked. Tolkien had a younger brother, Hilary Arthur Reuel Tolkien, who was born on the 17th of February 1894. At the age of 3, he went to England with his mother and brother on a lengthy visit. Unfortunately, his father died in South Africa of rheumatic fever before he could even join them. This left the family without an income, so the Tolkiens were forced to live with his grandparents in King's Heath, now in Birmingham. In 1896, they moved to Sarehall, now in Hall Green, Birmingham, but then a Worcestershire village. He enjoyed exploring Sarehall Mill and Moseley Bog and the Clent Lickey and Malvern Hills, provided inspiration for Middle-earth, along with nearby towns and villages such as Bromsgrove and Ulster and his Aunt Jane's farm, Bag End, the name of which he uses in his books. Mabel Tolkien homeschooled her children. Although Tolkien liked to draw landscapes, his favourite subject was languages, and his mother taught him basic Latin. Tolkien could read by the age of 4 and write fluently shortly afterwards, and he became an avid reader. And Mabel Tolkien converted from nonconformity to Catholicism in 1900, cutting themselves off from the family and their wealth. In 1904, when Tolkien was 12, his mother died of acute diabetes at the rented farm cottage in Rednell, now also in Birmingham. Mabel Tolkien's assigned the guardianship of her sons to a close friend, Father Xavier Morgan of the Birmingham Oratory. Thus, after his mother's death, Tolkien moved to Edgbaston in Birmingham and attended St Philip's School. In 1903, he won a foundation scholarship to King Edward's School. St Philip's School is now a sixth form college and part of the Oratory where Father Francis Xavier Morgan was based, and where once I briefly taught. In 1912, Tolkien began studying classics at Exeter College, Oxford, but he changed his course to English language and literature, graduating in 1915 with a first-class honours. Following a rather complicated romance, Tolkien married Edith Bratt St Mary at Immaculate Catholic Church in Warwick on 22nd of May 1916. During World War One, he was commissioned as a secondary lieutenant in the Lancashire Fusiliers on the 15th of July 1915. He trained with the 13th Reserve Battalion at Rugeley Camp in Staffordshire for 11 months. Tolkien arrived at the Somme in early July 1916. In between terms behind the Bozincourt, he was engaged in assaults on the Schwaben Rebout and the Leipzig Silent. On the 27th of October 1916, Tolkien contracted trench fever, which actually affected nearly a third of all British soldiers, and was invalided to England on the 8th of November in 1916. This probably saved his life, as so many of his comrades and school friends lost theirs. It was during his recovery in Little Haywood, Staffordshire, that he began to work on what he called the Book of Lost Tales, beginning with the fall of Gondolin. Lost Tales was his attempt to create a mythology for England, which was never completed. On the 3rd of November 1920, Tolkien was demobbed and began working at the Oxford English Dictionary. In 1920, he took up the post as a reader in English language at the University of Leeds, becoming the youngest member of academic staff. While at Leeds, he produced a Middle English vocabulary and a definitive edition of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight with E.V. Gordon. Both became academic standards. He translated Sir Gawain, Pearl and Sir Ophio. In 1925, he returned to Oxford as Rowlinson and Bosworth Professor of Anglo-Saxon with a fellowship at Pembroke College. During this time, Tolkien wrote The Hobbit and the first 2 volumes of The Lord of the Rings. In 1922, he published an essay on the name of Nodens, following Sir Mortimer Wheeler's evacuation of the Roman Acapelion at Lydney Park, Gloucestershire in 1928. Sorry, I said 1992 he published. That can't be right, can it? It must be 1929. Sorry. In the 1920s, Tolkien undertook a translation of Beowulf, which finished in 1926, but he did not publish. It was finally edited by his son and published in 2014. In January 1939, he was asked to serve in the cryptographic department of the Foreign Office in the event of a national emergency as a code breaker, but his services were not required. In 1945, Tolkien moved to Merton College, becoming the Merton Professor of English Language and Literature, where he remained until his retirement in 1959. In 1948, he completed The Lord of the Rings. Both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are set against the background of the Silmarillion, but many years later, Tolkien had intended The Lord of the Rings to be a children's tale in the style of The Hobbit, but it soon became darker and more serious as he was writing. Though a direct sequel to The Hobbit is drawn on the backstory of Beleriand that Tolkien had previously developed, the title refers to the Dark Lord Sauron, who had previously been created, the One Ring, to rule the other ring of power, given to men, dwarves and elves, in his campaign to conquer all of Middle-earth. From the Shire, a hobbit land reminiscent of Worcestershire and Warwickshire, the story ranges across Middle-earth, following the quest to destroy the One Ring. Although often called a trilogy, the work was intended by Tolkien to be one volume, of a 2-volume set along with the Silmarillion. The work is divided internally into 6 books, 2 per volume, with several appendices of background material. Tolkien drew on a wide array of influences, but especially language, but including Christianity, mythology and Germanic heroic legend, including the Norse Volscana saga, archaeology, especially the Temple of Nodens, ancient and modern literature, the Finnish 19th century epic poem The Kavela by Elias Lonrod, and his work centred on the study of Old English literature, especially Beowulf. He was influenced by Celtic, Finnish, Slavic and Greek languages, and indeed their mythologies. Indeed, from a young age, he had invented new languages, the most developed being Quenya and Sindarin. Furthermore, it contains some 60 poems, another interest that he had from childhood. The arts and crafts designer and socialist William Morris was a major influence on Tolkien, and indeed on I, although Tolkien himself was deeply conservative, even admiring General Franco during the Spanish Civil War. Although so conservative, such a telegraph reader, that he would never have accepted the title of being a fascist, just deeply conservative. Tolkien stated that he'd been influenced by his childhood experiences of the English countryside of Worcestershire near Sirhill Mill. The urbanisation and annexation of Birmingham, including Sirhill Mill in 1911, was a theme reminiscent of those of the English Romantics, including William Morris. Then there was his personal experience of fighting trench warfare. Moreover, the militarisation and industrialisation inspired the character of Sauron and his forces. The orcs represented the workers that had been brutalised by the war and industrialisation. Themes include a reverse quest, a struggle of good and evil, death and immortality, fate and free will, and the addictive danger of power. Along with Christianity, such as the presence of 3 Christ figures for the prophet, priest and king, as well as elements like hope, hope and redemptive suffering. However, his work was not as explicitly Christian as those of his friend C.S. Lewis. There is a common theme throughout his work, however, and that is of language, its sounds and its relationship to people and place. In 1980, his son Christopher Tolkien published a collection of fragmentary material under the title Unfinished Tales of Numenor and Mid-Earth. Later, 1983 to 1996, he published a large amount of the remaining unpublished materials, together with notes and extensive commentary in a series of 12 volumes called The History of Middle-earth. The series shows the development of Tolkien's conception of Middle-earth as a fictional place with its own people, language and history. Based on his earliest notions of a mythology for England, through to the development of the stories within the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. Thus, it's not a true history of Middle-earth, but an out-of-the-universe history of Tolkien's own imagination. There is no true consistency between the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, despite being related works, as Tolkien never fully integrated all their traditions into each other. He commented in 1965, when editing The Hobbit for a 3rd edition, that he should rewrite the book completely because of the style of its prose. Middle-earth is the setting of much of Tolkien's fantasy. The term is equivalent to Miagor of Norse mythology and Midangard in Old English works, including Beowulf. The Old English Midangard descends from an earlier Germanic word alluding to the Old Norse Miagor anyway, transliterated to modern English as Midgard. Middle-earth was the centre of 9 worlds in Norse mythology, and of 3 worlds with heaven above, hell below, in the latter Christian version. Tolkien had to look to Norse myth, as so little Saxon myth actually remained. Therefore, Middle-earth is a mythical Mercia imbued with Viking heritage and just a little Celtic. It was created by Tolkien, as so little was really known about the ancient kingdom. And Middle-earth is a human inhabited world that is the central continent of the earth in Tolkien's imagined mythological past. Indeed, it's said that Tolkien really did not belong to the 20th century. Despite the obvious allegory contained in his work, such as the destruction of the rural idyll by industrialisation and the abhorrence of war. Indeed, the theme of the destruction of the rural way of life was a central theme of Mary Webb, the folklorist, whom I've already commented on. And Tolkien, although Tolkien was quick to assert that his work was not allegorical, clearly the events had affected him and his writing, and his work certainly embody a rejection of modernism. Tolkien himself did not see his work as a work of fiction, but the construction of Middle-earth was as much a construction of a history based on myth and languages of the Middle Ages. Although these myths, as with Tolkien's Middle-earth, are from a much earlier prehistory of Neolithic and very early Bronze Age, it's tempting to see Middle-earth as escapism. But it was not an escapism that Tolkien himself was aware of. Of course he was affected by industrialisation and scarred by war, but he was only escaping in his dreams and memories. Indeed, for me to suggest that it is escapism, I'm no better than those commentators, who you can find many on this platform, who adapt Tolkien's work to promote and push their own beliefs, whatever they may be and however they may contrast with those of Tolkien himself. This has a strong resonance with the folklore of Charlotte Byrne whilst describing the folklore of 19th century Shropshire. They allude to the Middle Ages, whilst seeming to be derived from beliefs and even morality of a much earlier age. Perhaps even more profound is the degree to which many of the images he creates can be found in Carl Jung's Red Book, suggesting that Tolkien was less influenced by allegory as a collective consciousness, albeit a collective consciousness which was accessed through a revulsion to industrialisation and war. Middle-earth comes from Tolkien's visions expressed by his dreams. Indeed, isn't Middle-earth the landscape we all access within our dreams? We're all scarred by industrialisation and the brutality of modern living. Like Tolkien, few of us can admit it, even to ourselves, let alone write an allegory of it. But then what Tolkien expresses is what we all feel in the deepest recesses of our consciousness. A desire for comfort and tradition and a willingness to engage in lost causes, to keep that and hold on to that which we are used to, even to go back to seemingly better times. The history of Middle-earth, as described in Silmarillion, began when the Ainur entered Arda, following the creation of events in Eilulden, the long ages of labour through Ea, the fictional universe. Time from that point was measured using Valian years. Through the subsequent history of Arda was divided into 3 periods using different years, known as the years of the lamp, the years of trees and years of the sun. A separate overlapping chronology divides the history into the ages of children and Ulverstar. The first such ages beginning with the awakening of the elves during the years of the trees, pardon me, and continued for the first 6 centuries of the years of the sun. All subsequent ages took place during the years of the sun. Tolkien's tales of Middle-earth mostly focus on the northwest of the continent. This part of Middle-earth is suggested of Europe, the northwest of the Old World, the Shire reminiscent of England, but more specifically of Warwickshire, particularly Worcestershire, the county town of Hobbiton at the same latitude as Oxford. Middle-earth is peopled by men, but also elves, dwarves, ents and hobbits, and monsters including dragons, trolls and orcs. Through the imagined history, the peoples other than men lived. After the period described in the books, only men are left on the planet. Indeed, Tolkien suggests that the greatest kingdoms were those created by man, although Tolkien does describe a number of politicals, not simply an absolute monarchy. Hobbits were neither fairies nor elves, just diminutive humans. They spoke the same language or languages as men in Middle-earth, and got along better with men than elves or dwarves, having no magical powers. Wherever Tolkien is read, the reader identifies with a local Middle-earth and with a race of hobbits. A friend of mine, also with family from the Stiperstones, describes his as hobbits, the effects of inbreeding all too apparent, maybe lacking a large foot but short in stature, looking somewhat similar, craving comfort and stoical in the face of the encroachment upon their lives. But the hobbits would lack the Brythonic or even the Norse phrases of my ancestors. No, they're solidly Mercian from North Worcestershire, not Shropshire, not even South Shropshire. Short in stature, somewhat eccentric, stoic and resisting the brutalisation that Birmingham brings with it. Whilst largely a new town, take a trip to the old town of Redditch today and you will indeed find hobbits. Refugees from a gentrified Bromsgrove, diminutive people cleaning the toilets at the Kingfisher bus station, or ambling along Archer Road, grumbling to themselves about the rain, the price of a tin of cider and police harassment. Hobbits brutalised by modern life and having now lost the battle. But then, of course, we all have hobbits deep within ourselves, bursting to begin their adventure. An adventure which will almost certainly lead us to being defined as deranged. So we remain as brutalised, compliant humans, diverted to posting comments on YouTube that the earth is flat. Maybe you will feel that I've gone too far, but surely you too dream of Middle-earth and your own adventure within, or of living in a hobbit house and living a simple, comfortable life. His depiction of elves and dwarves display a similarity to the views of Margaret Murray on the disappearance of the little people from Britain. War is central to much of his work overall. There is a triumph in military strategy and leadership, moreover magic. Nevertheless, there are tactical instances where magic triumphs, with wizards being employed as elite forces. Tolkien's own sketches show a flat earth with stars above it. However, Tolkien's legendarium depicts a catastrophic transition from a flat to a spherical world in which Aman becomes inaccessible to mortal men. For Tolkien, evil occurs when characters seek power, even for what they see as good. All too often there is an implied critique of the end justifying the means. Evil, therefore, is corruption of goodness. Power is about humanity and rejecting more power, more so than seizing it. This especially occurs when characters abandon the wisdom of the past. But Tolkien seems to suggest that there is more than a single path. By acting out of love and humanity, there will be multiple paths. These paths are illuminated by the light which penetrates through the darkness. Of course, this alludes to a Catholic spirituality that is all too familiar to me, but including within my own adopted Muslim faith, in sharp contrast to how Catholicism and Islam are portrayed in contemporary society. Above all, love triumphs over magic and greed and evil.